My name is Ryan Campon. I'm the old man representative on the panel. I graduated back in 1993. My degree is in political science. And my consulting career has spanned across both very large and very small consulting companies. And currently I work at a boutique consulting company called Pearl Meyer & Partners. And we do consulting on compensation issues, primarily for boards of directors on executive compensation issues. Let the rest of my panelists introduce themselves. Tell us a little bit about your consulting career and how you got from the University of Chicago to where you are now. And then we'll jump in with some questions about what it's like to work in consulting, as well as some of the key learnings in transitioning from your college career into the consulting industry.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. My name is Carolyn Janase. I graduated from the college in 2003, and my degree is in anthropology. I also have an MBA from the university, and I received that in 2010 through the full-time program at Chicago Booth. From the time I graduated from college for the next 5 years, from about 2003 to 2008, I actually worked in nonprofit fundraising. Not consulting, really not even very close to consulting. But I had a fantastic experience. I worked at a private school here in Chicago. Experienced a lot of growth in my career, and then went back to school, like I said, in 2008 for my MBA with the intention of transitioning my career. I was a career switcher with the intention of transitioning my career to consulting. When I graduated in 2010, I started with Accenture. I'm now a manager in our Accenture management consulting business, and I specifically work in our talent and organization group. So I focus on issues about human capital strategy and talent strategy, as well as some of our human capital analytics work. And currently I'm working on an organization design project at a large healthcare company.
Hi, my name is Oren Lieberman. I graduated from the college in 2002. My career in consulting, and I had a degree in economics. My career in consulting started the summer after my third year. I interned at Deloitte. How I got there was I was sitting, taking the next step. Heard a guy from Deloitte who was an alum talk about his time at Deloitte and what he liked about it, and I said, "Sounds like a cool place. He seems like a cool guy. I should apply there and we'll see what happens." And did a summer internship, really enjoyed it, and didn't even look for another job after that. Actually went to study abroad during fall recruiting, which was really stupid. I don't recommend that anyone does that. It happened to work out, but I wouldn't recommend that. So then I went to work for Deloitte full time for a little over 2 years. I was part of the technology consulting practice, and the majority of the work that I did there was in healthcare. So a lot of technology work at the time was being done to take your paper medical records and put them into computers, right? Seems like a not so novel idea today. Go to the doctor and see whether or not they're entering stuff onto a computer or putting it on paper. A lot of doctors are still doing things on paper. But I was, a ground level analyst. I, helped try to figure out, we have to scan in all this documents. What resolution do we scan it in at? So a lot of very tactical things, but problems that needed to be solved in order to move healthcare forward in this country. I got kind of tired of that. I just felt like I was pigeonholed in healthcare. And so I left Deloitte and I went to work at Hewitt Associates, which is now owned by Aon. And what I was doing at Hewitt was I was a technology project manager, and I managed implementations of those voice automated systems that you call into. So you pick up the phone and you dial in, and it says, "Hi, who are you?" And you talk to it. It's very advanced. And I got really bored really quickly because doing technology implementation work, especially at a place like Hewitt, is about doing the same thing over and over and over again. And by the third implementation, I knew how to rock this thing. There was no problem to solve. It was just kind of just get it all done. And so that's when I decided to go back to school. So I went to Carnegie Mellon for business school. Stayed in the same division for football. Just to, I didn't want to have to worry about, going outside division and wondering who am I going to root for, because that you just root for neither. And my goal in business school was to find a consulting, be more strategic, right? I had done the implementation work around technology. I want to do more of the decision making. Did not really think I wanted to be a consultant. Actually, I didn't really want to travel or do any of that stuff. And then I got a call one day from an engagement manager at McKinsey who said, "Are you thinking about going back to consulting?" I said, "No." And then I spent the next half hour telling him why, and then he told me McKinsey was different. And I said, "Yeah, of course you're going to tell me McKinsey is different. That's what you're trained to do. I'm sure you're very smart, but no, thank you." Luckily for me, they didn't really listen to me, and they kept coming. So eventually, I had more and more conversations, and I started to think like, wow, maybe I really should consider this. And so every conversation I had after that just led me to believe that this was the right firm to join, the right people to work with. My career, I spent about 4 years at McKinsey, doing a lot of random stuff at the beginning. So I took the traditional sort of random walk, and then found myself working at an airline and just loved it. And from the airline, I went to a rental car company, and I went to an aircraft manufacturer, and then I went to a railroad, and I thought, like, oh, I really enjoy this work sort of in the travel industry. So the majority of the work I did was in the travel industry, which is ultimately how I wound up at GoGo. So right now I work as a director of strategy at GoGo. If you're not familiar, we put internet on airplanes. So if you fly on Delta especially, pretty much every single aircraft domestically is outfitted with our internet product. So you can keep to your addiction to the internet while you fly. And the work that I do there is very similar to McKinsey. I work on board level executive decisions that need to be made, try to think them through and say, okay, we're expanding internationally. What does that mean? Do we need to have people in Japan? Do we need to have people in Europe? Do we need to have spare parts in all these places? So thinking through those kinds of problems are the kinds of things I do.
I'm Jenny Snow. I have actually quite a few similarities to Oren and Carolyn. I graduated in 2004. I concentrated in human development, so don't think that you need to be econ or anything quantitative to go into consulting, and I went directly to a large consulting firm in its healthcare practice. I had actually interned the previous 2 summers for a consulting firm. It was actually the healthcare and higher education practice, and got exposure to, even though I was in theory working in healthcare, I worked at Bosch. The client was Bosch, the big German conglomerate, and I worked in their power tools division up on the northwest side of the city. So there were processes in healthcare that applied to sales and how they actually invoiced their customers, similar to hospital billing, and then worked at what's now Rush University Medical Center on the west side here, helping them actually choose their electronic medical record software vendor at the time. They knew that they needed to make that transition and had hired us to help them actually select which product they were going to use. Really liked both experiences, liked working in healthcare, and had an offer at the end of the summer of my 3rd year to stay with the firm. And then I think sometime in the spring I accepted it. I kind of looked around at other options and ended up back with them. Really enjoyed it, stayed for 2 years, and found that it was a good way to get a lot of breadth within healthcare. So I focused on one industry. So I got a lot of exposure within healthcare, a number of different large health systems, but again, very sort of transactional, operational work, which I similarly got a bit bored of. It gave me a great foundation in knowing how hospitals operate, and I think today it gives me a lot of credibility that I have that sort of ground knowledge and can talk with anyone from sort of your coder or biller up to the CEO or a board member, and establish myself as someone who sort of knows the ins and outs of a hospital, but knew that that wasn't really where I wanted to stay long term. I actually thought from that I wanted to transition to the clinical side of healthcare, and I left consulting to do a post-bac, actually, because I hadn't taken all of the necessary pre-med requirements while I was at Chicago. And so I did a year-long program to sort of round out those requirements with the thought that I would go to medical school. And during the year that I was applying to med school, I took a job that was just supposed to be for a year at Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York, and I did health policy research around access to cancer screening and drug pricing, and applied a lot of the consulting skills, but in a research setting actually for a hospital. Really liked it. I caught the sort of health policy bug while I was there. Deferred my med school admission and or acceptance, and stayed for an extra year. And so I ended up, instead of going to medical school, getting a master's in health policy and management at Harvard, which would kind of combine the best of both worlds for me, of merging sort of policy at a high level, but then also sort of the more corporate side of healthcare, and merging the two of those together. And so when I graduated in 2011, I went to a small consulting firm called the Chartist Group, which is based here in Chicago. We only do strategic work for hospitals and health systems. So in light of health reform and the Affordable Care Act, basically the whole economic model for how hospitals operate and receive payment has changed, or is in the process of changing. And many hospitals don't have the internal skill set to be able to adapt to that change, prepare for that change. And so my firm, we go in and basically advise them on how they can remain viable and continue to serve their communities while sort of absorbing all of this change. So it's been a really, really interesting time to be in healthcare, and it's been super exciting. And I was successfully able to make that transition from the sort of day-to-day operational and transactional work, similar to what Oren was mentioning, and actually being able to advise the hospital executives on sort of the longer-term decisions that they need to make, like I said, to be able to remain serving their communities, just rethinking the way that they provide care and seek reimbursement.
Thanks, Phil.
Hi, everyone. I'm Phil Caruso. I graduated from the college in '07 with a degree in economics and a minor in classical studies. One of those I'm using right now. You can guess which. But my background actually had nothing to do with business at all. I did campaign politics, I did some stuff in food service, and during my fourth year I heard about this consulting thing through on-campus recruiting, and I talked to some folks and ended up really liking what I heard. And so after school I started with A.T. Kearney. They're a management consulting firm here in Chicago. And I told myself I would do 2 years in consulting and then move on to something else. That ended up being 4, and I'm now back in school on a leave of absence with the firm, doing my JD MBA at the university, after which I will return to Kearney and do a couple more years there at least in their consulting practice. So yeah, 2 years, so much for that. While I was there, I worked in our DC office for a year, I worked in our Cambridge office for 2 years, and I worked in our San Francisco office for a year. As you can tell, where you actually live for large consulting firms doesn't matter that much. You get on airplanes Monday morning in a lot of cases and fly to where your client is. So those moves weren't that important. What it did mean was that I got to work in a bunch of different practices with the firm. And so I spent a decent amount of time in our aerospace and defense practice. I spent some time in our financial services practice. And then I did a couple projects in our strategic IT practice. And so over the course of 4 years, I was able to, I think as Jenny was saying, get an idea of breadth of the industries that the firm worked with, as well as some of the different types of projects that we do. And really, over the course of 4 years, gained a lot of professional development, both substantively and in terms of your own skill set. So I had a great time. I'm looking forward to going back into consulting afterwards. And yeah, I think that's about it.
Hi, I'm Appy Hervé. I work right now at a mobile gaming company, actually, and I started in consulting, I graduated in 2008 with a major in economics, and I went into consulting because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I actually, honestly, didn't, when I accepted my offer, didn't really even know what my firm did. Kind of showed up and figured out it was a consulting firm that worked primarily with financial services, and we were pretty analytically focused. So over the 3 years, advancing up to like senior associate eventually, I got to get really well-grounded in analytical skills and eventually kind of started managing people. But when it comes to the point in your consulting career where you decide, do you want to stay, become a manager, or do you want to try and find an industry that you like, I got an offer to go work out in San Francisco at a gaming company called Ubisoft, and I worked in their Facebook game division for about 10 months before getting an offer to go onto mobile gaming, which is fairly similar. And I do analytics on games for them right now. When I was at Novantis, my consulting firm, I was just doing analytics on for retail, commercial banks in terms of strategy, like customer segmentation strategy and branch distribution strategy. And honestly, a lot of what I was doing there, I can take what I was doing and use right now on customers in a game as opposed to a bank. So a lot of the same skills you learn in consulting can be applied to pretty much any industry, which is why it ended up being a really good choice for me after college.
Thanks. One of the things that we're hoping to convey this afternoon is that the spectrum of consulting is very, very broad, and you have consulting firms with different business models and different expectations for their employees, ranging from kind of the intensity of work and the type of work that you do, as well as the travel expectations. And Phil mentioned that he typically travels kind of the Monday to Thursday, fly out on Monday morning, fly back on Thursday afternoon. I wonder if maybe we can start and go the opposite direction. Appy, talk to us a little bit more about kind of what is the work, how many hours a week did you typically work, and what was the travel expectations? Did you travel a lot or a little, or was it dependent upon the client that you were working on? And
Yeah,
you can come back down this way after you're done.
It was different, I think, for my firm because we were a small 100-person company that, because a lot of our projects were analytically driven, we didn't have to be on client site as an associate. So it depended on the project. Sometimes I'd have projects where I'd be flying 5 days a week, or sometimes people would have to be on client sites over weekends, and the hours would vary from getting 2 hours of sleep a night for 2 weeks to working 40 hours a week.
Yeah, so I actually think that's a good point from Ryan. And the issue with Carney is that while in a lot of cases the expectation is that you travel 4 days a week, there are periods when you're not traveling, and depending on the project, the need for you to be on a client site or working long hours, either or, will vary pretty considerably. So at the beginning of a project, as you might expect, you're spending a lot of time learning and getting up to speed with what the client's doing, and so you are spending a lot of time on site and putting in some pretty hefty hours. When you're in between projects or when your phase of the project is in a lull, you can spend a little less time on the road as sort of client expectations dictate. I think the other key is that depending on your firm's staffing model, that will dictate whether or not you are traveling more or less. Carney has a national staffing model, and so they don't really pay attention to whether you're based in New York or in Chicago or in Dallas when they're staffing up a project in New Jersey, because they assume that you can fly to the client site and get started on Monday morning anyway. There are other firms that I know that sort of look more locally to staffing, and I think we can obviously talk about industry trends, but that makes for happier consultants in some cases as well. I don't know. I like the traveling lifestyle, but we can talk about that later.
Jenny?
I completely agree that it's completely client-specific and what their expectations are. My firm tries to set a 3-day-a-week on-site policy, so you're away 2 nights instead of 3, so either Monday to Wednesday or Tuesday to Thursday. When clients agree to it, it's lovely and makes a big difference, but trying to set a 3-day on-site expectation and actually being able to execute on that for the duration of the project, is difficult. So I think we have the expectation that you travel Monday to Thursday, and then if it's anything different, it's just a bonus. I would say that I have a fairly local client right now that's an hour away, and so I can come home in the evening, or I can stay near the client, and it's nice to have that flexibility, but I find that I still default to stay up there just because I'm more productive when I'm on site versus working at home. My firm is actually based here in Chicago, but I live in the DC area. So I don't have the option. We're a smaller firm and we don't have a DC office. So I don't have the option of actually going into an office on a Friday or going into an office when I don't need to travel. And working from home can be incredibly challenging. I've gotten better at it, I think, but the distractions at home are enormous. So sometimes I actually prefer the longer hours traveling Monday to Thursday so that I have a little bit more freedom on Friday. But it's highly variable, but my firm is pretty clear about expect Monday to Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I would say that my experiences at Deloitte and McKinsey were very similar in terms of just the standard model is you fly out to a client on Monday morning and you come back on Thursday. How that actually plays out in reality was very different between the two. So in my 2 years at Deloitte, I think I put in like 300,000 miles flying because I was flying to the West Coast every single week. And I remember I had a project at the beginning. I spent 8 months in Portland, Oregon. Beautiful city, beautiful city. No, actually, I did spend a lot of time seeing it even, but I flew red eyes home every single week. Okay, now red eyes are brutal on a week-to-week basis. So that was really hard, but I was fresh out of college. It was kind of fun. I didn't pay for any of the food that I ate during the week, so when I come home, my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, like we were like, all right, let's go out to eat, and that was a lot of fun. At McKinsey, I spent about half of my time on the road and half of my projects in town. But it's important to realize, like, what does being in town mean, and what are the trade-offs that you're making? So if you're in town, especially in Chicago, in town could mean like Walgreens, right? Like Buffalo Grove, like where you're driving from your apartment downtown, and it's like an hour and a half commute. And that's on a normal day. That's when it doesn't snow, right? And so, there are days like, right now I commute out to Itasca, which for those of you who don't know, it's just a little south of Schaumburg. It's on the other side of O'Hare. If I leave at 6:15 in the morning, right, I can be at work by 6:50. I speed a little bit at that time. But if I leave by 6:45, it then takes me an hour and 15 minutes to get to work, or an hour and a half. Some days it takes longer. Being able to fly short distances versus long distances, also trade-offs. Portland, Oregon, San Francisco, great towns to be on an expense account and all that kind of fun stuff, but really far. An hour flight from Chicago, think about it. Where are you flying to? You can fly to Pittsburgh. I like Pittsburgh, Cleveland, not too bad. Oklahoma City, I spent a fair amount of time in Oklahoma City. So again, there's upsides and downsides to all this that need to be considered. Like also with the staffing model. So firms that have where you don't spend as much time with the client sounds really great, right? The flip side of that, not saying one's better than the other, but the flip side of that is that you're spending less time with your clients or in front of your clients. And a big part of what I took away from my consulting experience and the skills that I learned were about sitting face to face with clients and understanding their problems. I mean, sometimes even just taking clients out to lunch, right, and getting to understand them better, and then you have a better relationship with them potentially to get the data that you need, or be able to be more impactful there because you have a relationship with them, right? That's the upside to being at a client all the time. Similarly with the staffing models in terms of regional versus national. If you want to be in town more, that's great if your firm has a really big client base locally. But if the local client base isn't the kind of work that you're going to do, right? The flip side, right? The trade-off you're making is, well, maybe now you don't have quite as many, or it won't be as easy to have as many options, right? So for me, like I ended up loving doing work in travel. The majority of travel-related companies in this country are not in Chicago, right? There's United, right? There's Hyatt, I guess, is also. But that's pretty much it, and that's a pretty limited client base, to work off of for a career. And so, for me, I knew that being part of the travel industry that I loved would mean that I would have to travel a lot. So again, I just want to make sure that people realize, that the staffing models and the amount of time you spend with a client or without a client has its ups and downs.
Yeah, agreed. Accenture is a national staffing model, just like A.T. Kearney and other firms are. And so, we can be expected to travel just about anywhere. I mean, we even have an analyst right now that's on my project that's traveling from Boston to Phoenix every week. That's rough. For an analyst especially, we don't try to make the analyst do that, but, he's getting a lot of miles, I guess. But yeah, I travel every week, Monday through Thursday. I usually get on a 6 a.m. flight on Mondays, that's the worst part of my job, I think, is waking up at 3:30 on a Monday. And then I come home on Thursday evenings. The one thing my firm is trying to do is some options for less travel. So we have a couple programs going on right now. Some of it has to do with if you don't need to be there all the time because you're in a particular phase of the project or because of the work that you're doing. In some cases, just like you mentioned, we've been able to negotiate with the client. If the client agrees that, okay, yeah, these group of people don't need to be here for the month of March. Maybe you work from home 2 weeks out of the month, and you kind of flip-flop. Other things that we're doing, we are trying to build up some of our local markets so that people at least have the option of staying at home, right? So you may be on a project where you're traveling, and then the next project you're traveling, and then you don't really want to travel, right, for a little bit. And so we're trying to give people in our larger locations throughout the country, so Chicago, New York, San Fran, et cetera, more options to be local on occasion. I will say that in terms of the number of hours that I work, it's fairly moderate, I would say, for the consulting industry in general. Yes, there are days when I get up at 3 in the morning to prep for that day's meetings. That actually happens probably too often, but for the most part, I think I work probably 60 hours a week. And I think what a lot of folks try to do, especially if you're traveling, is you try to structure your life so that you fit more work into Monday through Thursday, right? So work hard while you're not at home, right? What are you going to do? Go sit in a hotel? I mean, there's not much to do unless you are exploring the city that you're in somewhat, but even that can be challenging depending on when you get out of work. So that way Friday is more like an 8 or 9 hour day. And then you don't have to work much on the weekend. I mean, I almost never work on a Saturday. I can't remember the last time I actually even pulled my laptop out on a Saturday. Sundays, I usually pull it out around probably 6 p.m., just to kind of ease back into the week, answer some emails, kind of get things a little bit ready so I feel ready when I get on the ground on Monday. One other small, and it's interesting that you mentioned these sorts of trade-offs. One other small benefit that I've seen for travel versus not travel, and this had never dawned on me until I was talking with a friend of mine who works for a smaller consulting firm. They do really short projects, and they usually staff very locally. So you may have a team, she may have a team of 8 people, and they're all in Chicago, and that's where they're working. Well, guess what? You can all meet in the office on Saturday, can't you? That it may not be such a good thing for all of you to be in the same place every week, because your project leader, whoever it is, could ask you to come in on Saturday, and hey, you could all be together. Isn't that fantastic? Contrast that with my project. On Thursday afternoons, everybody goes home. And, I'm working on a fairly large team. I think there's about 60 of us now. Home is literally every corner of the U.S. So I guess we could work virtually on Saturdays, but we really don't. And there's no way for all of us to really be together. So, just a small trade-off that, with the travel, which can be a hassle. I mean, most weeks it's fine. The problems is when you have delays, right? I mean, the problems is when you're stuck in a snowstorm and you just really want to go home on a Thursday and that kind of thing. I mean, that's really when you start to feel it. And like I said, Monday mornings, getting up at 3 in the morning. But other than that, you deal with it. Somebody's paying for your food. So, you're usually staying in a fairly nice hotel, depending on where you are.
Highly variable.
There are no nice hotels in Peoria.
There's the Embassy Suites, but that books really fast. Otherwise, you usually stay in a pretty nice hotel. You'll go to dinner with your colleagues, sometimes with clients, and you get to have that life, and you just structure your life around it. And hopefully Fridays can be not a nothing day, but a little bit lighter day. Perhaps you spend it at home. Most people don't come into the office at Accenture on Fridays. It's just an occasional thing when you kind of choose to. We're very virtual. And I'd say that's probably true for any consulting firm. My whole job is my laptop bag. I don't have an office. I have no true office at Accenture's offices downtown. Essentially, we have a hoteling kind of system. So if you want to go in on a Friday, you can kind of grab a space and kind of rent out a space for the day, rent out a cubicle. So I don't have a physical office. I have a place to sit at my client site, but it's not mine, right? So everything we do is so virtual. We're a very global firm, and so that's just how we work, and you actually get used to it fairly quickly.
Let me share with you some of my perspectives, which may be a little bit different, or experiences and perspectives may be a little bit different than the rest of this group here, before we move on to another topic. I tend not to travel a whole lot at all for my kind of role and work in our firm. My travel is usually, on average, about a day a week, but I can go 3 weeks without traveling, and then 1 week have to fly to 3 different cities. So it kind of works out to about a day a week. But that's perfectly fine with me, because the thrill of travel has long since passed, as Carolyn mentioned. I mean, you get the fourth time you're stuck in Evansville, Indiana, and sitting at the bar because there's a snowstorm and your flight's 4 hours late. That you get over the thrill of travel pretty quickly.
You have to remember, though, the idea of being stuck at a bar with an expense account for these guys might actually be an upside.
Okay. Fair enough. I would also say that I'm to the point now in my career that I would much rather sleep in my own bed and hang out with my family and friends than to spend a night at the Hilton in Buffalo, New York.
Yeah, I miss Chicago.
So it depends, and I would say that not every consulting firm has the kind of fly out on Monday, come back on Thursday business model. So as you're exploring opportunities in consulting, make sure that you understand and ask questions about what the staffing model is, what the travel expectations are, and if you want to travel a lot, look for those opportunities where you can fly out on Monday and come back on Thursday. If you don't, then look for those other firms that you don't have to travel as much. Why don't we kind of transition a little bit to maybe differences in consulting firms that are related to size. And maybe some of you can kind of talk a little bit about working at a smaller firm versus working at a larger firm. Because I think that, at least in my experience, I've worked at 2 very large firms and 2 relatively small firms. A lot of the culture of the organization is driven in part, or in large part, by the size of the organization. Appy, you worked at a relatively small firm, is that right?
Yeah, so Novantis has an office of about maybe 3 to 5 associates in Chicago, plus, maybe like 5 principals, managing directors, and then our New York office has about 90 or 100 people. So it's pretty small, and we would travel to New York a lot, to the headquarters, to work with associates there. And I'd say that I haven't worked at a big firm, so I don't know how much the differences are, but some of the things I liked about it were you got really close with everyone in the company, and that meant you had resources where it might be a little bit harder at a bigger place. Like, because I know, so-and-so was really good at this one thing, and I know her because the company's so small. I can go to her and ask her for help, and it makes it a lot easier to get stuff done efficiently. And also the culture was great. Like, everyone was pretty good friends. You could go out in groups that included literally every associate and have a good time, as opposed to just only getting to know your team. So.
Could I skip you for a second, Phil? Jenny, you worked at both a very large and a very small firm, right?
I have. There are tremendous culture differences, at least in my experience. I'm with the smaller firm now. We're about 85 people, and I agree with Appy. I know everyone in the firm, from the analysts up to the directors, which are our equivalent of sort of an equity partner. And I know pretty much how everyone is staffed at any given time. So it's really easy for me to pick up the phone or send an email when I have a question. if there's a particular topic that I need some background on, I can reach out to a person who I know is working on a similar project or has worked on something in the past, and that's really nice. We also have the flexibility. It's also a private company, so we also do a lot of things that my big public firm was never able to do. So for instance, every year we go on a firm-wide retreat in the summer for about a week to, some fabulous resort in New England where it's nice and cool in the summer. And basically spend half the time with each other, sort of catching up on industry knowledge and advancements in healthcare and policy changes, and then our families come for the rest of the week. So I actually, not only do I know everyone within the firm, but I know many of their family members as well, and that's really nice. That is not an experience that I had at a large firm, at my large firm at all. And so it does have a much more familial culture, and it's closer, and we're sort of all invested in each other, and we know our schedules and how demanding it is. So anything that we can do to support each other, we try our best to do. That said, because we're small, we don't have the sort of administrative resources that I was used to at a large firm. I do a lot more stuff. I book my own travel. We don't have sort of we just started sort of a research team, so that sort of stays abreast of sort of all those topics in healthcare and advancements, and then sort of disseminates knowledge down. But that's been a fairly new thing versus Bearing Point, Deloitte, which is where I was before. A lot of that was sort of built in, or the IT support, travel support, all of the admin stuff was much easier because it was a firm supporting 10,000 people, not 85. And it's just cost inefficient for us to do some of those things. But the downside of that is that the burden falls on all of us, and that's up to the partners. Even our partners don't have admins. They, book their own travel and schedule themselves, and that creates challenges too, because some are better at it than others. And it's like, in some cases, I really wish I could pay for the admin to manage the schedule and hold the hand of a partner. And it's just not the case. But on the same token, like, I can reach out to the partner and complain, and it's like, you really have to figure out a better way because you are triple booked right now, and this is just not an option, versus, I could never speak to a partner like that before. So, I mean, there's a lot of flip sides, but I would say sort of the biggest trade-off is sort of a closer knit community where I feel much more involved and connected to everyone, and it's a sort of happier place to go to work every day, where I don't sort of feel like one of 10,000 people. On the flip side of that, I spend more of my time than I would like focused on administrative things, or things that I feel like should just be easier.
Yeah, maybe I can elaborate a little bit more on some of those observations, and then Phil and Oren, Carolyn, you can correct my misperceptions if they apply to your firm. Over my career, I worked for both E&Y and Mercer, which were 10 to 20,000 employees, and then as well for SCA Consulting and Pearl Meyer Partners, which were both firms of about 100 people across 5 to 7 offices. And in my experience, the benefit of working in a larger firm is that there tends to be significantly more resources, and it's significantly more resources in a sense that the firm can invest more in formal training and development programs. You tend to have a depth and breadth of technical resources across the firm, provided you know how to access them. They're not always the easiest to find. But that allows you to provide, theoretically, it allows you to provide better answers and consulting advice to your clients if you know how to access those resources. There also tends to be a greater number of opportunities to work in different offices, in different countries, in different types of projects, because you have such a large firm with all these other client opportunities. The trade-off from my perspective is that because you have 10 or 20,000 people, you have to have processes and procedures and guidelines and structure in place to manage the chaos. And so there tends to be a little bit less flexibility in terms of doing things your own way, or rules and processes in place for making sure your time gets entered at the appropriate time and your invoices get sent out at the appropriate time. And from the small firm perspective, there tends to be a little bit more flexibility in and maybe a more entrepreneurial culture to those smaller types of firms. The trade-off, obviously, is you don't have those resources either from the technical consulting perspective or potentially the administrative support or training and development resources. So, and there may be fewer opportunities if your firm doesn't have offices in Dubai or London or Frankfurt or wherever it is in the world. So you may have slightly more limited development opportunities from a personal perspective.
Yeah, I think, Ryan, you hit on a bunch of good points there. First, the breadth of work available I found to be very beneficial at Kearney. It's a mid to large size firm, about 1,500 consultants, but we sort of play in most industries here in the U.S. And around the world. So the opportunity to sort of work within either a functional practice or an industry group and get a lot of different experiences was certainly there just because there was always sort of new projects coming along that you might be able to get on board with. I think Jenny mentioned something that was interesting, the availability of colleagues who've done this kind of work before, either in an industry or in a functional practice, being able to pick up the phone and call them. At a big firm, that if there's the right process in place, that can actually be really beneficial because you've got 1,500 consultants who have worked in a bunch of different places, and so you can put out an email to the whole firm. There's a process for this. Asking if people
don't do that on your first day at work.
Don't ever. I never send
no matter
mine
what the
4
size
years.
is.
But yeah, so you can ask for people who have expertise in a particular thing that you're interested in, and someone probably has done it before, so they'll be happy to help you out. The global opportunities, I think, are really, really great. If you're interested in doing international work, at a junior level, they're usually, depending on global demand for consulting, resources can be pretty fungible. So they'll send you to Australia for 6 months, and if you're willing to do that, then there's some really great development opportunities there. I will say one thing about working at a big firm. As Kearney's a big firm, in the U.S. we actually have a bunch of smaller offices, which is where I spent most of my time. And I actually found that to be a bigger impact on my experience than the actual size of the firm itself. With our D.C. office, our Cambridge office, our San Francisco office, they were all in the 50 to 75 consultant range. And for me, that meant that I had the opportunity to kind of work with consultants at the very junior level, all the way up to sort of the office lead partners, and develop rapport and connections pretty quickly. And so I think if you're thinking about, do I want to work for a big firm or a small firm, take a look at where you want to work geographically, because that will also play into sort of the opportunities to either distinguish yourself or develop yourself in different practices, just because the opportunity to develop those relationships really can swing pretty widely depending on where you are.
Yeah, I mean, I work by far for the largest company amongst us by a factor of 10, really, out of anyone's experience. So Accenture has 275,000 employees globally. So that we have our Accenture Management Consulting business, which I'm a part of, and then, of course, our technology implementation business, as well as our outsourcing business. And yes, it can be bureaucratic, obviously, but certainly everything everyone has said about the resources aspect is true tenfold, really. And being a training ground, especially for analyst level folks coming out of college, I mean that's sort of what we do in many ways. We developing people is our business. That's what we do, and that's true for any consulting firm, really. We've done a good job. I guess what you could almost say is, we've done, I think, a good job of sort of harnessing our size in good ways. I think this is to your point. So we have a lot of really sophisticated collaboration tools. I will guarantee that whatever problem you were having doing something on your project, someone in the world has done it that works for Accenture. So, somebody, anywhere. And our collaboration tools are actually fairly sophisticated, and the culture has supported people using them. I don't think I've ever emailed someone in the firm and not gotten a response. And I mean that globally. I remember one time I needed some help with something, or wanted to see an example of how something had been done by someone else. And I, posted a little message on one of our discussion boards, one of our collaboration tools. And by the next morning, I had an answer from a woman in Belgium and another woman in, I think, Singapore. Because literally they're working overnight while I'm sleeping, right? So it's perfect, right? It works out. But I mean, that's just amazing. Now, if you really think about it, those two individuals have no obligation to help me out. I'm probably never going to meet them in my life. Their performance and pay and all of that, their rating, none of that depends on whether or not they shot me that email, right? Whether or not they sent me that information. But, less than 24-hour turnaround, they were happy to help. And so, what I like about the big company feel, I haven't worked in a small one, though I have worked in a small organization. So, before college, I worked at a private school. We had 200 employees, right? So, I've gone to something much larger. What? A little bit. A little bit. Yeah, a little bit. What I like about it is when we get it right, when we bring to our client the forces of our management consulting business, our technology business, and our outsourcing business to come up with true services and true solutions, what we call Accenture on its best day, that is a pretty powerful thing to see in action globally. And so, everything everyone said about resources, about opportunities globally, and about just being able to reach out to others in the firm to get more information, to get help, is, I think, all true. And it's just it's a matter of all of us doing our part to make sure that we continue that. And, I don't want to say that we try to make ourselves feel small. I don't think anybody ever does that, and I don't think that's possible, to be honest. But, to give us a small feel, but to be collaborative is really important. And so, look for that, regardless, I think, of firm size. But, you take the bureaucracy and the processes and get your time reports in by 12 Central Time on the 15th and the 31st of the month, and this kind of thing. I mean, you take that with the breadth of opportunities.
Great. I wonder if we can talk a little bit about transitions into consulting and out of consulting. We have, Jenny, you spent a couple of years in consulting before you went to the non-consulting world, but then transitioned back into consulting. And Carolyn, you transitioned into consulting. And Appy and Oren, you both have transitioned out of consulting.
Twice.
So maybe, Jenny, Carolyn, you can talk to us a little bit about why you chose to transition into the world of consulting, and then we can, maybe Appy and Oren, you can talk about why you decided to transition out of consulting.
Sure. So, I think in college I was considering consulting, if I remember correctly, but I figured it would be something I might go to eventually, which interestingly enough is what ended up happening, of course. But coming out of what I was doing in nonprofit fundraising, had a lot of growth, left my organization at the director level with people reporting to me and that sort of thing. And what I really liked about where I had gotten in my career there was that in some ways, because of the work I was doing, I was our director of knowledge management. I managed all of our data and the use of all of our data for our fundraising operations. And in some ways, by the time I got to my fourth and fifth year with the organization, I was almost acting as an internal consultant, because I was really helping my other colleagues either get a better response to a fundraising solicitation, or a better response to an event that we were putting on, or something like that. So in a lot of ways I was that sort of internal expert who was able to help my other colleagues use our data to the best of our ability as a group. And I really liked that I had taken my career there, and found a good place for me to say, okay, I'm ready to go back to business school and get my MBA and hopefully transition into consulting. And I will say it wasn't it wasn't the easiest transition. I also went to business school. I started business school the day Lehman Brothers crashed. So it was a very interesting 2 years for me and my classmates, even at Booth, in terms of finding internships, finding jobs. But I think we all did okay. But it wasn't easy, you know. It really took me truly the 2 years to fully make the transition. My first step was to my business school internship. I worked in corporate strategy for a for-profit education company. So I took my experience, obviously from my industry experience, because I'd been working in education for a long time, and applied it to a different venue, which was a completely different sector, the for-profit sector. And after that, was kind of able to develop myself as a business person enough, I guess, to make that transition into consulting, which is, like I said, what I had initially intended to do, certainly when I started business school, why I was going back to school and that sort of thing. And, you know, I am enjoying the fact that I do get to see a breadth of experiences. I've worked in several industries, retail, manufacturing. I'm now in healthcare, and I'm doing the kind of work that I want to do. It's very dynamic, and I really feel like I like working with my internal teams. I like working with the client. I mean, that's a very dynamic relationship, all of it put together as part of the project, and so it's been a good fit for me. But yeah, I mean, I was definitely a career switcher in business school, as we're called, and you know, it took me a little bit of time to make the transition, but it certainly wasn't impossible. And you know, I think it's been, for now, the right move for me.
Let's see. My transitions have been fairly specific, at least when I left consulting the first time. I think I mentioned in my introduction that because I was doing sort of very transactional, operational work, after you see sort of similar processes at different clients for the second, third, fourth time, you figure it out. You can recognize the issues. Every client handles things differently. Every hospital handles, you know, the process to get from A to Z very differently, but the start and end are pretty much the same. And I was getting a little tired of being at that sort of transactional level, and my practice within my firm, that's what they did. And even though in theory we had a national staffing model, it was sort of internal fiefdoms for each of the partners. So in theory, I could get staffed on, you know, one of the many other partners' work, but the main partner who I worked with, who is the head of the practice, was very protective. So only if he didn't have a project to staff me on would he allow me to get staffed elsewhere. And so the projects that he did were all very much in this same vein. And I could have transitioned to another practice within the firm, but I was kind of done and ready to, you know, explore other options. And for me, I had mentioned that I did a post-bac thinking that I wanted to go to medical school and actually become a doctor and transition to the clinical side of healthcare. And I knew that I never actually wanted to practice medicine. I didn't want to see patients, but I thought that there was this big knowledge base that I was missing by working in healthcare but not having any sort of real clinical, much less expertise, but any sort of clinical knowledge, because to actually, or at the time I thought to actually be able to converse with physicians and actually be able to have an impact on their thinking and for them to take me seriously, I needed to have an MD after my name. And to get to, and all of the physicians, or all of the executives within the hospitals and even within my firm to a degree were physicians. And I thought I needed that knowledge base and that credential to be able to get to where they were. And I also just thought that going to med school would be really interesting, and that was knowledge that I wanted to have, whether not really thinking at the time that that was highly impractical. What I realized sort of later was that for many of these physicians, they were tired of practicing medicine, or with all of the practice of medicine has also changed drastically since when they graduated med school and first started their practices. And so that was really their way to get out of practicing, and they transitioned into more administrative roles within the hospitals, or were physician executives within consulting firms, and were able to leverage their credential in a way, and that got them access to clients and gave them an expertise and could do additional work because of their knowledge. And that, I know that didn't occur to me at the time. It was just for me to get from point A to point B, or really to partner level or to that hospital executive position, I needed that clinical knowledge and I needed the credential. So I left to do a post-bac thinking that that's what and to go to med school thinking that that's what I would do. And when I left medical school, I would transition into one of those types of roles, at a more entry level of where those physician executives were that I was looking at as, an early consultant. And it was while I was doing research at Memorial Sloan Kettering that I remember it really, really vividly that one of the physicians that I was working with there said, if you do not want to practice medicine, do not go to medical school. Full stop. If you want to practice and you want to see patients, there's nothing better. Don't let this hold you back. But if you don't want to see patients, do not go to medical school. And so I ended up not, because it's just too much of a waste of your time and money and energy, and the opportunity cost of 4 years of medical school is enormous. So I didn't, and I spent a couple years doing policy research, and then a couple years getting my master's, and then and that was at the height of health reform. When I was making a decision, health reform had passed, and I had considered various policy roles in the government. I was really tempted to go actually work for an insurance company because they're leading, in some ways, leading a lot of the change, and thought that that would be a great opportunity. And in the end, the sort of best marriage of policy and business and the clinical side of healthcare and everything all wrapped up into one was to go into this strategy role within consulting. And so I've kind of found a great fit for me, and that my firm is small and only focuses on healthcare and only does strategy work at a high level for, some pretty major academic medical centers and health systems across the country. So it was a great marriage for me, but it took me a while to figure that out. I would not have been able to make the transition and go mentally ready to make that transition from a large firm to a strategy-based firm, I don't think, without those stops along the way.
So Appy and Oren, you two are the only two that are not currently in consulting. Well, Phil kind of has a timeout right now.
He gets a pass.
What was it? What was so frustrating about consulting that made you want to leave it?
Yeah, so for me, the decision to leave each time was very, very different. The sort of the sequence of projects that I had at Deloitte, I spent 8 months in Portland working with a health insurer there. And at the end of that 8 months, I thought, and health insurance was one of the, at the time, like the economy was kind of in the dumps, and so I was perfectly happy going to serve a health insurance provider. I didn't think anything of it, and I didn't know whether. I just went in with an open mind. And then what happened after that was someone that I had worked with on that project, like a more senior member of the team, I guess I impressed her enough that she wanted me to come work on her next project. So she had left the project a month before I did, and she was working in San Francisco on another big project. And so she requested that I come to the project. And I was flattered. I was like, oh, this is awesome, right? They like my work. Like, why wouldn't I? And this was someone I had a good relationship with, so I liked working with her. And so I said, all right, like I'll go do this next project. Well, that ended up being another 8-month project, this time in San Francisco. Luckily, didn't have to take red eyes, so I got home at midnight every Thursday. That's an improvement. And I had a great team there, a great manager there. And at the end of, this is now 16 months in, my manager there, who, like I said, it was a great guy. He was like, Oren, you can't keep doing this. Like, you can't keep flying out to the West Coast every week. He was flying up from the, Southern California, and he was literally like, dude, you gotta find something closer to home. But the best that we could do at the time was to roll me to a part of the project of this massive, IT rollout in Denver. Okay, so now I'm on, month 17 through, 22 of doing healthcare work, and a couple of things happened. And Denver's not that, it feels far from here, but it's a 2-hour flight. It's the same thing as flying to New York. So that was an improvement, but I had the confluence of two things. Number one is I had the realization that I joined consulting for the variety of work, and I wasn't seeing quite what I wanted. And this notion of sort of feeling like stuck in a fiefdom. At Deloitte, it really is a very sort of, it's not deliberately fiefdoms, but it's, once you get into like one practice, it's very hard to switch. At least I found it very hard to switch. So that for me was a disappointment. And then I also had a manager who I just did not get along with and I hated. And she would not, like, I felt like I had been at the company long enough that I could be trusted to, like, at least have some responsibility. And she just did not, just constantly like questioning my work and just like constantly just not showing any trust in me, and not giving me any sort of development. And at the end of that sort of 6-month stint, by the time I got to the end of that 6-month stint, I was like, okay, I got to figure out a way out of here. My project after that, which got me to beautiful Birmingham, Alabama, also healthcare. I had a great manager there, which made me think, I was like, oh, this guy is awesome. But at that point, it was kind of a little bit too far in, and I was like, you know what, I need to leave. I would say my transition out, it was not well thought through. How I wound up at Hewitt, I think I received I had put out my resume on LinkedIn, and I think I received this just like a cold connection from one of the recruiters there. And I started going through it, and they were really interested in my background as sort of a technology implementation person, and they were willing to hire me as a project manager. And I was like, finally, the responsibility that I'm looking for. I'm tired of just everyone telling me what to do. Like, I have a brain of my own, I can use it. And that's not to say that all analyst work is like someone telling you what to do, but I was ready for that next level of responsibility. I didn't really do my homework in terms of just, what would it mean to work at a company that does HR outsourcing, And what does that really mean? Like, what would that job actually be? I was just thrilled to have like that I'd be like managing something and kind of in charge of something. So that's why I left Deloitte, and I think it was the right decision to leave. I think I just wound up at the wrong place for me. McKinsey, totally different story. So I stayed at McKinsey. I went into McKinsey thinking, gosh, I don't know if I'm really going to love the travel. And my wife and I had a long conversation about this, but it felt like this was like a once in a lifetime opportunity to go work for what people call like the best place on earth, right? Like the Disney of consulting. Like, this is like the pinnacle. And I met a lot of people, and I was like, you know what? If I hate this, I'll know it pretty quickly, and I won't be really worse off for it. I'll be okay. And I ended up staying there for nearly 4 years. And so my transition out of McKinsey came also from a confluence of factors. It's never that easy, especially when you like the people that you work with and you love the work that you do. So first was the realization that if I wanted to continue doing the work and travel that I love, that I was constantly going to be on the road. Okay. 2 was my wife was pregnant. Okay. And for me, I did not see a lot of role models of male partners who seem to have a relationship with their kids that I wanted to have. So I'm not trying to pass judgment. Like, there are people who are, there are partners who are men and women who, they find a way to make it work and in a way that suits them. Like, I actually, it's really weird and you won't understand until you have kids, but I actually enjoy like being up at 2 o'clock in the morning with my son, who's now like 8 months old, like holding him, and getting him to go to sleep. Like, that to me is important. And I couldn't do that if I was on the road. And so, and then literally, like, I was literally on the beach with my wife in Mexico. Like, we were just like sort of, taking a break. This was over like the winter holidays. And I had this realization, like, I don't want to get on an airplane when I get back. I had rolled off my previous project, so it was kind of a decision point. Like, I don't really feel the urge. Like, I used to get excited by that, and I don't really feel excited by that. So rather than trying to make this work with a baby and, and figure out how to do that, and I was also at the point where I had to kind of make a decision, do I want to sort of make a run for partner or not? McKinsey doesn't just let you sit, you can't just stay an engagement manager forever. It's like, this is what they call it up or out. It sounds very scary, but it's just kind of like, listen, you need to progress, and this is a firm of people who progress, and in order to progress, like, you have to stretch yourself. And I didn't see myself as a partner at the firm, and so I just decided, you know what, but let's, I should stop this. One of the really nice things that McKinsey does that Deloitte didn't do, at least at the time, and certainly not for analysts, was they give you what they call search time. Okay, and literally what it is depending on how long you've been at the firm, you get a certain amount of paid time to look for another job. Okay, and it's amazing because when you're working for a client, you can't really spend the time thinking about what you want to do with your life, right? Or like and networking and doing all the things it takes to get a job. And McKinsey recognizes that and wants to make sure that as people are leaving, that they have the time to do that, because ultimately they also want you to become a client, so they want you to be happy when you're leaving. And so the way I wound up at GoGo, GoGo actually had been a client of mine. There are a bunch of former McKinsey people who are there. And when I served them, the week after I had finished the project, the chief marketing officer had actually given me a call. He was a former McKinsey guy. He gave me a call and he basically said, Oren, I know it's pretty much binary. Either you're ready to leave or not, but whenever you're ready to leave, please give us a call. Okay? And that was really cool because especially like the week after you finished engagement, like sometimes you still have that pit in your stomach. You're not sure whether or not the client was really happy. Well, this was at least a sign that the client was really happy. At the time, I wasn't ready to leave, but when I was ready to leave, I knew that those were people that I had enjoyed working with. I saw them as, like, when I was there consulting with them, I was like, these people seem really cool. They're working on something really exciting. I can see myself working here. And so that's how I made the transition over to GoGo. And I've been really, really excited and really happy ever since.
Great. In the interest of time, maybe I can switch subjects and we'll just spend one more question here, and then I'll open it up to questions from the audience. Phil, if you were a second year in college and you knew you wanted to go into consulting in 3 years, what would you have done differently with your college career, your second and third and fourth year in school?
It's actually a really good question because, as I mentioned, I sort of stumbled into consulting, as it were. I think the biggest thing for me was developing, skills and understanding of how to work with organizations and people, and recognizing that doesn't necessarily come through a standard consulting internship pipeline. There are a lot of ways to get skills that firms are looking for when they're recruiting undergraduates that don't involve going to spend 10 weeks over the summer doing some mini engagement. If you do extracurriculars, if you work with if you volunteer with organizations downtown. There are lots of ways to take leadership and show initiative and develop analytical skills that when it comes time to putting a cover letter together, when it comes time to doing face-to-face interviews, that you can frame as saying, listen, I don't know a whole lot about the business world because frankly none of you will as fourth years, but I do have these skills that show the potential and make me somebody you want to train and develop and turn into someone that can really be beneficial to your firm. So I think if I'd known that a little better, I would have sought out more opportunities to work with problems that involve numbers and organizations and people, whether that would be extracurricularly or professionally. I'm not really sure. I did, like I mentioned, some campaign politics over the summers when I was in college, and a lot of that was working in Excel. And I mean, we haven't talked a lot about the nitty-gritty yet, but a lot of what you'll do as an analyst is working in Excel or in PowerPoint. And so if you have even a rudimentary knowledge of what putting a pivot table together, analyzing data, and stuff that you might never think to look for unless you happen to need to analyze a bunch of numbers that someone throws at you. Take a look, play around with it, because it could actually be beneficial for you when people ask you what you know about analytics.
Great.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah, please.
Don't sit on the sidelines on anything that you do. I know it can be really easy, especially when there are more senior people, more senior folks around, students, to just let them lead. And it doesn't mean you have to be the official leader of anything, but whatever role you have on a team or whatever role you have in your organization, take it and run with it and figure out how you're going to make it better. All the top consulting firms are looking for people who take initiative, who don't just like wait for someone to take orders, who's looking for, so again, don't wait for someone else to tell you like what to do, because none of the firms really care like whether or not it's like an actual consulting project and it has anything to do with business. If you work in a lab, and I interviewed a student who like his summer project, like he was working in a lab, and on the side, like he realized that the way that like blood samples were sorted in the refrigerators or the freezers or whatever it was really inefficient, because they were constantly like trying to reshuffle them, and like he totally reorganized the way that they do that and the way that they classify stuff, right? That has major impact for that small lab. Okay, but he took and the key thing is that he took the initiative to go do it, right? So seek out those kinds of opportunities, because they'll make for really good stories.
And sorry, I have one more point to add on to that. And it's just whatever you choose for your summer internship, I don't think that there's any benefit, even though I did intern in consulting both the summers after my second and third year, I don't think that's important. I think whatever you choose, take the initiative and carve out your niche, and make sure that there's something discrete that you can do, because you'll be part of a larger project or a larger effort, but make sure that you can describe what you did and what your contribution was and whatever its impact was on that overall project, even if it's small, to be able to describe your impact and your contribution in an articulate way. You don't need to over-aggrandize your contribution and make it sound like you
Save the project.
Yeah.
Save the project, created world peace over your 10-week internship. Like, no one's going to believe you. You're a summer intern. Just make sure that you have a meaningful contribution to whatever your small slice of the pie is, and be able to articulate that contribution. And I think that will help you immensely. And even if it's not your summer internship, whatever activity you're involved with, any research project, whatever the case may be, and I think that will help you immensely in cover letters, in interviews, whatever it may be.
Yeah, and I would also add maybe that you may hate the summer internships that you have, if you have any, but at least you're learning something, and you might just learn that that's not what you want to do. And I think that as you go throughout your career after you graduate, you may end up in jobs that you hate. Look for opportunities to learn from those jobs as well. And maybe your learning is that that's not what you want to do, and you never want to work for a small firm again, or you never want to work for a big firm again, or you never want to work in healthcare or banking or whatever industry it is. There's still learning experiences from those jobs or internships that you may end up hating. Let me open it up to questions from the audience. What?
Are you going to go out and roam?
Yeah, I'm going to go roam. What?
The host.
What do you want to learn? What questions did you want us to ask that I didn't ask?
Well, a lot of consultants talk about how when you start as an analyst, you're doing a lot of analysis, and you're working with Excel and working with a lot of numbers. But what does analysis really mean? What really comes out of those numbers? And are there any examples online that we can look at to get an idea of what analysts actually do on a day-to-day basis?
Who wants to take it?
I can take it.
Happy?
So I'm an analyst now, doing similar stuff to when I was a consultant. From my experience, I used a lot of SQL, if anyone's heard of it, which is a database querying language, to kind of pull large data in. We would get databases from our customers that were anything from like from our banks, our clients. We'd get like customer data, like their balances, anything that we could get on them. I did a lot of small business projects where we would get different like firmographic information about small businesses, where they're located, and some of the analysis I would do would be segmenting those customers, like figuring out from a data perspective how to group them into logical segments that we could then make strategic recommendations. Like, we notice these guys don't go into a branch very often, so they're really inexpensive because you don't have to pay for someone to deal with them. But they're doing this or this or this with their balances, so you should have like this strategy with them. So that's like an example of how we would use data. It would typically be like through SQL. We'd use Excel and PowerPoint to then illustrate it. or give that data back to the client, because oftentimes, I don't know about anyone else who's done analytics as a consultant, but shockingly, a lot of companies do not have analysts, so I found I was doing the job of what I assumed banks already did, but I don't know why they don't. We're way more expensive. And to go to your first question, that's part of the reason why I left consulting, because I was like, I'd rather work on my own products if I'm doing this type of thing. So,
I like your question because I think it brings up an important point, which is know why you're doing what they're telling you to do. Know why you're spending 2 weeks staring at a screen, fiddling things around, cleaning up a data set, which is enormous. I mean, that happens. Know what the business reason, what are we trying to drive with that? Don't do those kinds of work in a summer internship or, once you start working in a mental vacuum. You're not going to grow. I have an analyst working for me right now, and he's very good in Excel. He's very smart. He gets it. And, as we're trying to grow him together, it's much more about, let's look at something that doesn't have an easy answer or can't be, fiddled around with in a spreadsheet. Let's look at things that are a little bit more complex and, like I said, maybe gray area, right? You have to make a decision one way or the other. So it's pushing him beyond that, because I think, his last project, he's relatively new. His last project, he was very good at dealing with the Excel and doing the customer analytics right, pushing him in a different direction. But know why. What the purpose of being an analyst is and how you're driving things forward. I guess I can give an example of an analyst that worked for me doing, the purpose of what he was doing was, we had a team of people, so it was about 25 people that worked on this team, and we had to help the client figure out how we were going to distribute work amongst these people. And I work for a marketing division. That's my client is in a marketing division in a big company. And we had to figure out how we're going to distribute work. And it's like, well, we're going to distribute work by you're in charge of these 5 products, or are you in charge of these 5 clients? And is that enough work to fill one person's day? And da-da-da-da-da. So this analyst did a fantastic job. He had to take essentially 2 enormous data sets and kind of squish them together, right? Because there was some information over here and there was some information over there, and we had to kind of pull it together. And it was messy. But what I think he did really well, thank goodness he sat there and fixed things up so that we could actually bring these 2 data sets together to get out interesting insights and help our client make a decision about how they were going to distribute work amongst their people. But what I think he did well is he understood why we were doing that, and he was able to come to me after sitting with these data sets and actually make some interesting points, some valid points, put together the slides, that went to the client. So it's not just about the piece, which he could do and you could do and any of you could do. It's the so what. Know why they're asking you to do something. You're allowed to ask that. You're allowed to listen, understand why they're asking you to do something.
Can I also just broaden that a bit?
Sure.
So, especially as an engagement manager at McKinsey, I did my best to, not really distinguish between what an analyst does versus what an associate does out of business school, because, equally clueless. Let's be honest. And so, the role of an analyst, yes, there's a lot of data work involved, especially at the beginning, because that's usually like the thing that a lot of folks that we hire are good at. But there's a lot of client interaction, or there should be a fair amount of client interaction, where sometimes the best thing that an analyst can do is make a friend at the client who happens to be a really good source of new information or new insights, or just get out there in the field and find something that we can't just find in the data. We did some work with the Department of a small part of the Department of Defense, had a brand new analyst straight out of school. Really smart guy. None of us knew, and this was an IT sort of spend analysis. We were just trying to figure out how the government could spend less of your tax dollars or your parents' tax dollars on IT in this particular group. And the most valuable thing that this kid, he was a kid to me, that this kid did was we were having a really hard time like getting any information about like, you know, how many servers, like a very basic question, how many servers are in like this one particular facility, because we just didn't know. And he went down to the facility, like showed up at this, you know, got the clearances to show up this like naval base, and asked to take a tour of, you know, of the facility, okay? And what did he do? He walked up and down, had them like, you know, show him around, and he just sort of counted like, okay, there's like 12 rows here. Each one seems to have like, 12, racks on it. Okay, there are like 144 servers in the, you know, rough sizing. There are 144 servers there, right? And so it's not all just like sitting behind a computer, right? It's going out there and figuring out like, okay, the problem I'm trying to solve is like, how are we going to spend less money? Okay, problem now I'm trying to solve is what is that money being spent on? Okay, well, we know this one, you know, black hole. Let's go figure out how we're going to, you know, provide some clarity there.
So I imagine everyone has been on both sides of the interview table. And one of the key characteristics we're talking about here is demonstrating intellectual curiosity. What is it exactly that when you're interviewing candidates that will, you know, demonstrate to you that someone has more or less intellectual curiosity?
So I think this is a good point because it transitions into case interviews, which I love dearly. And not everyone does, and if you don't, then you might not want to be in this room. So I think one of the most important things that I look for in a case interview is when the interviewee is sitting there, they take a minute, they listen to the question as it's given, they pause, and then they write down their thinking ahead of time. And it's sort of a very basic standard process, but you look for the way that they're actually laying out the frameworks, and if it's canned, and if it's sort of very straightforward and out of vault, like that's great. And if you can do the analysis, like yes, you can read a book and do some math. But if you're able to sort of raise ancillary questions or considerations that aren't necessarily inside the question that I've given you or aren't inside sort of the very basic, white bread consulting case, that's going to be really important. I think the best case interview I did at Kearney, we did a marketing spend analysis, and it was sort of very straightforward, and you came to some conclusions. And on the back end, I sort of pointed to, well, here are some, other optics considerations. Here are some things that we might want to worry about, pissing off our customer base if we go this route. And those sort of things I think are really important because it shows that you have a broader understanding of what the client's position actually is. They're not just asking you. I mean, they're asking you for how to save money. But if how they're going to save money is going to ruin the rest of their business, they probably shouldn't do it. And if you can recognize that and raise those concerns succinctly, I think that's really the best way to show intellectual curiosity.
Can you take another question from the audience? Go ahead, Oren.
I was going to say the other way that I find that I see that is that when folks can, even if they have no familiarity with the industry that the question's about, if they can draw parallels to something they are familiar with, right, that also just shows that you're able to kind of just tie these different things. Like, well, I don't really know what goes on in a bank. I mean, the last time I was in a bank, and you start going into it, right, like, if you can tie those things together, it shows that you think more broadly than just like, okay, what is the most direct answer to this question?
Hi. So I have a question that kind of deals a little bit more with sticking kind of outside of consulting. So a lot of people in this room are economics majors or majors who are very analytical, statistics, stuff like that. But for me personally, I really enjoy sort of psychology, and so like the client or sort of having the interaction with the people and working in that area of it. And I was wondering, especially with human development major anthropology, how that sort of worked into consulting, or how you're able to transition your skills from working with people, but also balancing the fact that you have to do a lot of analytics, that you have to have sort of that business type person, economics type person background.
Sure. I had this conversation last night actually at we had an alumni reception in preparation for today's taking the next step, and the fact of the matter is you guys have had more math than most other people graduating from college. I mean, that is a fact. Even if you took 130's calculus, you just have, right? It's an expectation of what we do. And so I don't consider myself bad at math. I'm not my husband, the physicist, but I don't consider myself bad at math and science. And I think in general, you can be analytical in any field. English majors, English concentrators, by definition, have to be analytical. That is what they do. That's what literary analysis is, right? And so I think the same is true for anything that we're asked to do at the university or anything we choose to do at the university. I think obviously I didn't go into consulting until after business school. So, I had the 2 years of business school. But I think even if I hadn't, my job actually, even before business school, I was working directly with the CFO of the organization I worked for, and I had no issues dealing with the finances of the company, of the organization. I could pick it up pretty quickly, and so I don't think I don't think whatever concentration you're doing, I don't think is a barrier. I always say to people in the college, do what you want to do in the college. It won't make very much difference when you leave. It really, really won't. Do what you want to do what you enjoy, do what you're going to excel in, and then move on.
I've never heard of a consulting engagement that required a differential equation.
Yes.
True.
In the last minute or two that we have before we end this, do each one of you maybe want to offer one or two short words of wisdom for this crowd? What would you tell them?
Before you show up for interviews. Seriously, I know I've come to UChicago from the 3 years I was at consulting after that and interviewed on campus, and I know the campus has gotten a lot more social since then, but people are very nervous during interviews, and we've had so many really smart people come in, and consulting is about people skills too, and you just have to, if you're not, I was really uncomfortable coming into interviews when I was on the other side of the table, and if you go and you practice and use CAPS to do those sessions and get used to talking to someone else and talking about yourself, you will be leagues ahead of half the people that show up and can't. I've had people add fractions completely wrong just because they don't know what's going on. They're like, oh my God, I'm talking to this person in a suit, and they freak out. So,
yeah.
Phil?
I actually agree with what Appy said, and to build on that, do your homework and don't just do it on the internet. Talk to people who work for the firms that you're applying to, because if it's as basic as how you pronounce the name of the firm, I'm not kidding. People come in and they say, I'm really interested in working for A.T. Kearney, and they're done right away because it means that they haven't done a minute worth of preparation learning about the firm or what they actually kind of build into. So I think do talk to people, take a minute and get beyond the websites, because that will show you've a little more invested than the 30 minutes before your interview.
Great. Jenny?
I would say leverage all of those great critical thinking skills that you get in the first couple of years in the core. The analytics and all the quantitative skills are great, but you can learn them. But the ability to actually step back from your analysis, and the point that Carolyn made about don't do your analysis in a vacuum, know why you're doing it. But also when you're done, instead of just giving someone a data dump, and it's oh, here's my model. Well, it's well, so what? What does this mean? Take a step back and apply those great skills from your psychology class. And it's what is this going to mean in the larger context? And that's how you're going to grow, and that's how you're going to advance, and you'll always have those analytics skills to fall back on, but then you can actually, the impact and the value that you're going to provide is going to be based on your insights, not about whether you can chug out some model.
Great. Oren?
Just to complement what Abby said, I would say actually spend more time thinking about the behavioral part, because that is where I've seen most, I can separate the good from the, bad from the ugly. The best stories that you need preparation, and the best stories are like movies, right? They build, there's conflict, right? How many stories have I gotten where there's really no conflict? If I ask you to tell me about a time when you had to convince someone to do something they didn't want to do or something like that, and you tell me that you just showed them some data and then they were convinced, that's not conflict, okay? So think about how do you interact with other people? How do you influence them? How do you change people's opinions? Because that's a big part of what we do.
Carolyn?
Whatever you do coming out of the university is probably not what you're going to do for the rest of your life. And that's okay. That's fine. Yeah, relax, really. Do something substantive, find something that you can grow through. Right? Good chance that you'll move on. Yes, I know people at my company who have been there since college, but I think they're probably in the the small minority, right, in our firm. And that's true in consulting. I think that's probably true in just about any industry at this point. You know, find an interesting opportunity, find a good place for you to learn and grow, and just continue doing that. I mean, virtually all of us on the panel have had changes and pauses and, you know, moves here and there. And that, I mean, none of us have been out of the college all that long. I think I'm the most, right, at 10 years.
I'm the most.
Besides Ryan, who also is celebrating a milestone reunion like I am this year. I mean, you know, in 10 years, I've gone one end of the spectrum to another.
And that's why it's not called taking the final step.
Right.
Yes.
So, Carolyn stole mine. Your first job out of school is highly unlikely to be your last. Follow your passion. I would echo what David Axelrod said, and look for opportunities to learn.